Hello and welcome to Mythmakers. Mythmakers is the podcast for fantasy fans and fantasy creatives, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. My name is Julia Golding, and today I am joined by Alwyn Hamilton, who she's halfway through a really exciting series aimed at, I'd say, young adult upwards, and the first part is called The Notorious Virtues. So welcome, Alwyn. Welcome to Mythmakers.
Thanks for having me, Julie. I'm excited to be here.
Now, you might be able to tell a keen listener that Alwyn's accent isn't the same as mine. So, Alwyn, tell us where you're from and how you made that long road to being a fantasy writer.
Yeah, of course. So the accent is Canadian. So is one of my passports. I was born in Canada, and my parents worked for a company that was based in Canada, based in Toronto, but had offices in France and offices in Italy as well. And so when it was just me, we'd move between all three. And then my brother was born and ruined everything. Settle somewhere permanently. And so we ended up settling in France, just because they have a better education system. And so that's where I grew up in France. So people always think, oh, you're French Canadian. No, I'm Canadian and French. It's different. And then I ended up coming to the UK for university when I was 18, back when you still could with a French passport pre-Brexit, and just sticking around and staying here. And I think growing up in France is probably one of the big things that made me a fantasy reader, because everything that was sort of written in English was a foreign world to me, whether it was we're going to prom or we're going to fight dragons. That was equally not something that I had in my daily life. And I just found sort of fighting dragons a little bit more relatable than sort of, oh, we're kissing boys at prom, or we're going to English boarding school, or all those things that were equally fantasy worlds to me that had a little bit less jeopardy and a little bit less magic, weren't as interesting. So I hugely think that growing up sort of in a second culture is one of the things that made me a fantasy reader over a reader of other genres as a kid.
So were you reading French fantasy? Because I'm wondering if the French homegrown fantasy is a different track from the sort of obvious ones for English speakers.
I never really was. No, I speak fluent French, and I went to French state school for 15 years. But I have never really read for pleasure in French, except for comic books. Comic books is a big thing in France. And while I do think that my French is excellent, it will never be as good as my English, and I'll never be as comfortable in my English. But I think also part of that is because quite quickly it became a divided thing in my brain that reading in French is reading for school and reading for English is reading for pleasure. So if I had to turn for a book for fun, it would always be in English. So I never actually read, and actually the first time I ever was reading something similar to my classmates was when Harry Potter became a phenomenon. And that was the first time that we had something in common, because I'd always be reading something they'd never heard of. They'd always be reading something I had no idea about. And then Harry Potter came out. It was like, oh my God, we can actually talk about this now. But of course, the catch was all of the titles of sort of proper nouns in the book series were different. So like Hogwarts was Poudlard, things like that. So they'd say like, oh, I love the part where he goes to Poudlard. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Lice of lard, what is that? So it wasn't quite the sort of bridge, but yeah.
It's interesting what you were saying about how the sort of living in France thing made Anglophone world, particularly American by the prom reference, seem like fantasy, because I think one of the things about the Harry Potter series is that a lot of it is just boarding school stuff without much magic, the sort of house points and playing, all that stuff, the structure. And that's a foreign world to me, having never been to boarding school either. And I think there is something exotic about that idea of kids dispatched to this world, aside from before you even get as far as magic.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose that's true. Yeah. There was a certain sort of appeal, because I also did read a fair few boarding school mystery books.
Oh yeah, they exist too.
Or like Famous Fives or things like that. Yeah. So there's something appealing about independent from your parents, off to have an adventure, whether it's magical or not, isn't it?
Well, the first rule of writing for children is get rid of the parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, that could be literally that they're gone, i.e. the classic orphan, or it could mean that they're the problem.
Yes.
It could mean they're mysteriously abroad. Usefully abroad. I've used that when I don't want to kill off parents there. Because if they're there, they rain on the parade of the child, and,
Yeah.
Where's the space for adventure? Anyway, we must talk more about your book, Notorious Virtues, which I devoured. I started reading it on Thursday and finished it on Sunday, and it's quite a long book. Um, it's 500 pages, and I didn't do the skip read. Sometimes when I'm reviewing books, I'll quickly get the gist. I do that. I actually sat and read it all the way through, which please take as a massive vote of confidence in the story. So tell us about Notorious Virtues.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Notorious Virtues is my second series of books. So I wrote a trilogy as my debut, called Rebel of the Sands, which was first person, sort of action adventure. And I loved writing it and I love those characters. But by the time I got to the end of writing three books from one point of view, I was like, you and I need to make other friends, girl. Like I'm just like, we need to talk to other people. I've been in one head for quite a long time. And there are also quite a lot of action sequences in Rebel of the Sands. And so when deciding what I wanted to write next, I was very clear on the fact that I wanted to write something a little bit uh, less action heavy. That sort of I got to there are certainly action sequences in
Yeah,
there.
definitely.
Yeah, there are, but there's also parties and ball gowns and caviar and things that you can't have when someone is racing for their life across the desert. And so I pitched this idea as 1920s New York heiresses meets Grimm fairy tales. So the conceit was that it's a family that has passed down wealth and magic generationally through a trial of virtues. And it's very much based on all those fairy tales that you hear that are sort of, the king had three sons and he didn't know which one should be king after him. So he sent them on a quest for a golden bird. And they passed an old lady on the road and got the first one spat on her and the second one kicked her. And the third one was like, here, have my sandwich. And oh God, it turns out that the old lady knows where the golden bird they were sent to find is. And by not being a complete prick, the third one is the winner and sort of ascends the throne by virtue of his virtues, essentially. So it's essentially that test that happens generationally to test who is the worthiest to inherit. And so I sort of wanted to explore that theme and also explore the theme that we tie sort of money to worth, to sort of, if you're rich, it's because you've earned it, or is it, generational wealth, but also that not all virtues are created equally. Just because you're brave and jumping out of a plane doesn't necessarily make you a good person. Sort of all sorts of different virtues can mean different things, and not all are sort of measured equally, I would say. And then I also wanted to subvert the trope. So there's four main characters, and one of the main characters, Nora, has been very entrenched in the family the whole time. And then one is a new arrival to the family, which is quite a sort of classic fairy tale trope of sort of being plucked from obscurity and brought into this family. But I wanted to explore that in reverse, because I have a friend who is a social worker who once pointed out to me that there is a real lack of books that are both that are sort of positive to give to children who are not being raised by their biological parents in children's literature. Coming back to sort of Harry Potter as the example, it's you're being raised by the horrible Dursleys, but your birth family is wonderful and glorious and gives you access to this magical thing. And that's a lovely story and a frequent trope, but she works frequently with kids in foster care or kids in adoption. That's not the right message to give to them. She says there's sort of two that she really thinks are positive for kids in that situation. And one of them is Superman, because Superman is being raised by a lovely adoptive family, but it still acknowledges his birth, and that's why he has his powers. And then the other one that she thinks is really healthy for kids is Kung Fu Panda, because he is being raised by the crane, but it does not erase his pandaness. And so her point was basically, I wish that someone would write more positive adoption stories, more positive fostering stories. And apparently what I heard was terrible birth family. So my way of sort of subverting the trope was not to write a positive adoption story. I hope many people do, but to write that trope of, oh, you're plucked from how you're being raised back to your birth family, but oh, they're awful. They're just some of the most self-involved people. And you're going to be made to prove that you're worthy to belong to them, essentially. So yeah, so that was sort of the origin point of everything.
So the one who's within the family is Nora, and the one plucked from obscurity is Lottie.
Yes.
What I found interesting about the trial of the virtues is that the people running the trial, the creatures running the trial, it seemed very sour and That's why they're notorious virtues. They're not like a religious saint-like virtue. They are, you can be an awful person and still win a trial.
On a
So,
technicality.
yeah, on a technicality or being in the right place or doing it quicker. Um, so were you sort of purposely adding this sour note to that? You started off with the idea of the three kids and the old woman, which is usually straightforward virtue.
Mhm.
There you go. Save the cat, you know. Um, so were you adding this sour note to sort of slightly slant the fairy tale idea here? Because fairy tale creatures aren't very reliable.
No, I think that's part of it. And I think so what I started by doing quite straightforwardly is sort of listing what virtues it was possible to be tested. And there were some very obvious ones like bravery and things like that. But I also wanted, I think I approached it from a character point of view first. And I wanted
Mm.
to make it challenging for our main characters. Nora, who is the one ensconced in the family, is from the beginning of the book smarter than everyone else. That is never in question. And so it was very deliberate that there is no trial of intelligence. There's nothing in there for her to sort of just already validate who she already is and prove that she's smarter than everyone else. She
Oh, I
has to
see.
sort
Mm.
of live up to other parts of her, of who she is, and sort of push herself a little bit. So that was very deliberate to kind of to sort of challenge her and who she was, and both of them and who they thought themselves to be, essentially, and sort of try them in their most difficult things that they might have to live up to. There's other heiresses other than the two of them competing in these
Yeah,
trials, one of whom is Modesty, who is a very difficult person, who is
yeah,
not who is a person who is sort of exactly what I'm talking about with in terms of sort of not all virtues are created equally, that she is from the outside, she looks glamorous and beautiful and fun and, you know, and she's nice and but underneath she's actually quite a bitter, nasty person who is sort of grubbing for this money. Yeah. And so I kind of wanted to highlight her as the reader. You very much know the wrong person is being rewarded, but she is the one who faced the troll. You know, you can't argue with that. That's the, you know, the sort of the tricky thing. And I don't want to spoil or anything, but it sort of hopefully brings you slowly to who their grandmother is as well.
yeah. No, I mean, blame the parents, blame the grandparents, to why she's like
Generational
that.
trauma.
Yeah. So you've done the period of the sort of 20s flapper periods. You mentioned that you had a sort of in mind New York. I was also thinking Mitford sisters.
Yes.
Of course, if you know the real Mitford family,
Mm.
which is a fascinating, messed up family from the English class system. And but I was also thinking Berlin with that kind of sour note of the sort of cabaret feel to
Mhm.
the world, heading towards fascism or something really dark, which fits with the Grimm.
Yes.
Obviously, in fantasy, you're allowed to mash all these things up, but why the 20s? Why aren't you doing the classic swords and sandals, you know, dragon fantasy from with the castles, you know?
Yeah.
Why not that? And why 20s?
I think there's a few different reasons. One of them is going to be quite boring and practical, so I'll start with that. Which is that Rebel of the Sands, my trilogy is set in kind of like an 1880s-ish technologically. And one of the characters, Nora's grandmother, her other grandmother, not the one she shares with all the other heiresses, is a teenager in the Notorious in Rebel of the Sands. So so there is a link. They are on the same world, these two series. And I very much did want to link them. That's a character who appears in the second and third book of the trilogy. And you meet her when she's a teenager and now has gone off and is now someone's grandmother. And I wanted to sort of say that evolution. So just in terms of sort of time passage and where we are technologically with Rebel of the Sands, it made sense that it was 1920s. And I wanted to have this sort of technology present. The other reason that I wanted to do it was sort of thematically, which is that sort of Depression era, 1920s, I think is quite a big time of sort of financial and sociological divide and huge change. It's the time when we see a huge disparity between wealth, sort of coming out of the 19th century into the 20th century, and also we see wealth now, but it's not the same wealth as same wealthy people who had the money in the 1920s, that, the Vanderbilts, the Gettys, things like that. That money was all dispersed over generations. All those people who made money from railroads and industries and things like that, has been quite dispersed over the last century since then, essentially. So that's kind of partly where the idea came from, of this fear of dispersing the money, is where the Holtzfalls, the main family in the book, have found that sort of keeping it on one person keeps their power and keeps them running the system, essentially. That by not dispersing their wealth, that is how they have never changed and grown and evolved and maybe seen that the world is evolving around them, essentially.
Yeah, that's interesting, that idea of consolidating the money in one, because of course that's how kingships work.
So, yeah.
And there is a sort of fantasy trope of thinking the kings are the answer, Return of the King, that if you have a king, you're fine. A good, benevolent king, benevolent magnate in the case of your world, everything's fine.
Yeah.
But you're actually unpacking the fact, well, what about concentrating it on that one person? What happens to everybody else and how it perverts their way of behaving? I also had a feel of the sort of Russian Revolution.
Yes, that's very much
society underneath.
Yeah.
Because it's so fragile, the society.
If the world were like a Sleep Number mattress, everything would adapt for your comfort. Because as your life changes and your body changes, Sleep Number mattresses adapt and shift to give you personalized comfort night after night. And now it's the final days of our Everything's on Sale event. Save up to $1,200 on mattresses. Our Memorial Day event ends Monday. To experience a whole new world of comfort, visit a Sleep Number store or go to sleepnumber.com. Sleep Number, to a good life sleep.
So you've got this this story with Lottie and Nora, but you've got some other characters in there. You've got some male characters, Theo and August. August is a journalist. Theo's a sort of bodyguard figure. If I thought of everybody, and then there's the sort of the old folktale passages as well. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different POVs. How do you manage that, and how do you avoid the problem of, say, the reader just liking, I know, Nora and not wanting to read about August? Because that's a real challenge for multi-viewpoint books.
Yeah, it was a challenge. And also even just the challenge of getting into the habit of writing in third person. Having written 3 books in first person, when I was first drafting, I would literally switch mid-sentence without realizing. I'd be writing sort of, she walked down the street, I looked up at the sky, backspace, 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 she looked up at the sky, kind of thing. So it's a muscle within writing, like everything else, I think, that I had to build up. And Notorious Virtues was a huge learning process. I had never been a planner before. I had always sort of roughly known where I was going and seen big pillars, but I discovered that with multiple points of view, I really did need to plan a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that you always have to be conscious of is there are 4 points of view, but they are all geographically in the same place, and their story, where they all do have individual stories, their stories do cross over and then merge towards the end. So I wanted to be very conscious of, when we're in a room with all 4 of them, even though we're in Nora's point of view, that the others do need to be sort of acknowledged and say something and sort of be noticed by the point of view character, because you as a reader do care about them as well, because they were your POV character last chapter and they'll be your POV character in the next chapter. So I don't have a good answer to this is how it's done. It was very much a learning process and trial and error. And sometimes I would find myself halfway through a chapter that they were all in, and then realize this would be much more resonant from a different character's point of view.
Yeah.
So I would go back to the beginning, and all the sort of events would be the same of, we're going here and we're doing this, but I would have to rewrite the whole thing because it was now no longer in Theo's point of view, it was in Nora's point of view, or what have you. So, having said that, I think a lot of people have picked favorites, and that favorite tends to be Nora. So I'm also not oblivious to that.
Oh, I think you managed really well, because I think for me, it's between Lottie and Nora.
Thank you. Yeah,
because I think that August and Theo are plot drivers, that they have part of the plot that they're driving, and I think that's how you answer that question, is you make sure that when you switch to a chapter, there's something in that you need to know. Though I've got a soft spot for August, of course.
August actually wasn't, when I pitched the book, I pitched it with 3 points of view characters. August wasn't part of it. And then as I started to write it and Nora's um, storyline became more and more about the mystery, because the reason that these trials are happening is because Nora's mother, who was the heiress, has unexpectedly been murdered. And so there's also sort of a murder mystery investigation amidst these trials happening. And it very quickly became apparent why Sherlock Holmes has a Watson, why, everyone has a psychiatrist. Like, this girl needs someone to talk to.
Yeah.
She needs someone to sort of have be her partner in not in crime and crime fighting and crime investigating.
But he's also her way into experiencing a lower class life.
Mm-hmm.
Because she's been this gilded butterfly, or seemingly a gilded butterfly, and he's a sort of struggling journalist who really has to worry about where the next paycheck is coming from. So I think that was a great choice in that one. Theo, so Lottie is the one platform of obscurity. Theo is one of the bodyguards. Tell us about the bodyguards, because they're in a very interesting own dilemma, aren't they?
Yeah, so the Holtzwalds are our main family, who are sort of the ones holding these trials. And one of the reasons they have accumulated so much land, so much wealth, all of these things, is because they have the ability to create a space that's outside of the dangers of the woods that everyone lives in. So there's these sort of enchanted woods that are a little bit like the woods that you read in fairy tales, that you go in and you might get lured off the road by a big bad wolf kind of thing. And they have the power to protect people from this. And in order to live on their land and be protected, people have offered them things over generations, whether it's chickens or money, or in the case of one knight who came along running from something in the woods, it's his loyalty. So 1,000 years ago, essentially, a knight fleeing from something in the wood that had captured his love stumbles into there and says that if they protect them, then if he is protected by the family, then he and his descendants will protect the family forever. And so 1,000 years later, his descendants are still protecting the descendants of the original Holtzwall. And this is not a decision any of them have made. None of them have ever been allowed to make the sort of life decision of what do you want to be? Because the answer, if you were born into this family, is knight. You are going to be a protector of this family. And there are some who see that as their duty and as their purpose in life, and there are some that very much chafe against it. So.
Yeah, and it's got a self-destruct element. It's because it's a magical pact. It's not like
exactly. It's not like you can just be like, actually, I think I want to be
be an artist.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Explore my other side.
Yeah, and it's sort of point out that even if you're really not suited to it, that's your life. And there's some people who are just not that great at it, but they weren't given the option to become an artist. And there is a very sinister element to it that if the head of the family tells them to do something, they have to do it. And I don't know if it's one of my favorite books from childhood. And you find the things cropping up from your childhood without realizing it. I don't know if you've read Ella Enchanted by Gail Carson Levine. I love that book. It's a Cinderella retelling where, as a child, Cinderella is given the gift of obedience, heavy quote unquote under gift, so that she'll be the perfect young lady. And that's how she ends up indentured to the step family, as they realize that if they tell her to scrub the floors, Cinderella, she has to do it. And that's how she sort of gets into that situation. That's one of my sort of childhood books I've read easily 100 times. And you find these things, influences from your childhood, creeping into your adult books. So you're like, oh, that's, the bit of the knights having to do what they're told. That's pure Ella Enchanted. That's where that came from.
Yeah. So, I mean, fantasy is obviously very often a mirror we sort of reflect up against society. I kept thinking of a lot of modern parallels, particularly about inequality in wealth. I would say that our equivalent of the Gettys and what have you these days are much less stylish.
Agreed.
But was that something you had consciously in your mind, or is it something you saw afterwards? Because I think for me, it often works afterwards. I find, oh yeah, that's worked out something which I didn't realize I was thinking about.
Yeah, I think it worked out afterwards because I think looking back on it, how quickly things have changed in the last few years is apparent to me. When I started writing this book, it was pre-pandemic. Obviously the wealth disparity has always been there, but it wasn't as obvious as it has become in the last few years of pick your crisis, pandemic, elections, wars, terrible things that have happened. I think the wealth disparity has become more and more obvious. The there's an There is another version of this book that doesn't exist anywhere in reality, but this book could have very easily been told from the point of view of the Grimms and be about toppling sort of the power hungry. I mean, the Holtzfalls are literally referred to at one point as sort of sitting on their hoard of money like dragons. And there is an element of that it could be about the brave Grimms fighting and killing the dragon and taking the wealth in order to sort of create equality. That would be a much more sort of straightforward version of this story. I didn't want to do that because I kind of already done it in Rebel of the Sands. It's not about wealth inequality, it's about dictatorship, but that is the story of sort of the little people rebelling against the big power. So that's why I didn't want to do that. But the narrative could very easily be switched, and it would be a different book, not from the Holtzfalls' point of view. So I wanted to tread that line quite carefully of making them interesting characters that you want to follow, but not being like, aren't rich people the best? Aren't they just, so
But
great?
I don't think you particularly have a heroic class, because I found the Grimms very unreliable, and I'm not convinced they'd be any better at running the place than um, the current rich people.
My shorthand for the Grimms, whenever I was sort of referring to them quickly, talking about the books, is magical communists. And as you said, sort of Russian Revolution, the best of intentions can work out very, very poorly.
Yeah.
And I think you'll see more of that in book 2 of how it's working out for them, essentially, how idealism translates into action poorly sometimes.
Yeah, no, I can see the logic of that going forward. So one of the questions was thinking about, partly because I was thinking about this when I was teaching other people writing, is about how magic systems work.
Mhm.
So, magic in fantasy works like a currency,
Yes.
how you spend it.
Mm.
So have you got favorite magic systems from other fantasy books you've read? And what kind of thinking went into how your own economy of magic works? So if I give you a scale, so in Harry Potter, there seems to be no end to magic.
Mm.
If you know the spell, you can do it. It's not
Yeah.
like, yeah. Whereas in some other magic systems, it's like a sort of rare resource that has to be mined or something like that.
Yeah.
So where are you in your magic economy?
It's interesting. I was thinking about this the other day because I do a mentorship program for a mentorship for a program, and I was talking to my mentee about her magic system and sort of saying that you can't have it both ways, of it being you're born with it and also you can learn it. And I think those are the two that I think of for me. I think you can be born with it and get better at it, get trained at something,
Yeah.
or it can be something that you can learn from books and things like that. And I have, I think, tended towards the born with it magics in my systems so far. So the magic in Rebel of the Sands primarily exists with children who are children of supernatural beings and humans. They're sort of demigods by any other name. So they all have a power, like a sort of how Hercules has super strength.
Yeah.
They have different things. So that's I think that's always sort of a touchstone for me. In this one, the power is sort of very much directly, quite as you said, sort of spending it's very much directly linked to money. It is another form of wealth, and it's also being used to power cars, but also power, charms that can fix your hair quickly or whatever, sort of things frivolous if you have the money to spend, non-frivolous if you needed to heat your house, kind of thing. So I wanted to treat it very much like money in the situation. The thing that's really important to me and that matters to me both as a writer and a reader for magic systems is that there be some sort of touchstone to come back to. For me, that's always a creation myth. All of my, whether it's true or not, or whether it's true to those characters or actually true in the story, I will always have some kind of myth of the making of magic or the making of people, of why we are here. So that myth in the Notorious Virtues is the fairy tale, the interstitial fairy tale chapters that you were referring to, tells the story of how the family got their power to begin with. And so that is always clearly there. And anytime there might be sort of a question or can magic do that, I can always sort of come back to that touch point. In terms of sort of favorite magic systems in books, there are a ton. I love the magic system in Leigh Bardugo's Grishaverse series. I always think that one's very sort of clever. It's called The Little Science in her books, and so it works out. It sort of is treated like a sort of additional like a higher science, something that can be taught and learned. But there are also people who are treated differently, who are very superstitious of it. There are histories of people with these powers being either mistreated or killed, and their bones treated like relics that could do magic, things like that I thought was just genius and fascinating. And then one that I've read really, really recently is M.L. Wang's Blood Over Bright Haven. Would you like me to spoiler it, or shall I not?
How spoilery is?
Okay, I can't. It's very spoilery, but that is a. I'll make it as unspoilery as I can. There is a city that is clearly built in the Arctic, that is shielded by magic, that is run entirely by magic, and it is sort of the bright haven of the world. But as the book goes on, a young woman who is the first female practitioner of magic and is very much breaking down those gender barriers starts to sort of discover the darker side of it and what the actual cost of it is. And it is an absolutely harrowing book and a harrowing discovery, and it's a wonderful read. And I think I've rarely seen sort of the cost of magic done better than that in terms of a book. I highly recommend it. We were reading it for book club, and someone finished it sort of literally an hour before book club, and we all got a sort of series of raging sort of text being like, "What do you mean it's a standalone? There's no sequel? That's where it ends? What are you talking about?" Sort of thing. And we were like, "Oh, literally just finished it. This will make for a fun discussion."
Yeah, I've got one which is in the sort of YA area. Is a writer called Madeleine Sellier. I think she's written a series of books, and one of them is called the Spoken Mage series. And what I found them through download. You know, I think she's more in that space. But anyway, what I really like about her idea is that it really exposes a class system. So magic in her world has been sort of corralled by those who can write it, and they become the sort of the ruling classes. And there's training and strict rules about how to begin and end your spells, and the quicker you get, the shorter the spell is, the more sort of powerful magician you are. And then out of the blue, this working class lass from a happy, lovely family discovers that she can speak magic, and it explodes the system, and they don't know what to do with her, because in some ways she's weaker than them, and in other ways, and she obviously hasn't been brought up in the right classes, and in other ways she is more powerful because she's more flexible.
Right.
And the series, I think it's 3 or 4 books, explores what happens when she enters that system that's been doing magic one way and she comes in of another. I really like that.
Yeah.
And another series I have enjoyed the magic system is the Trudy Canavan Magicians Guild series.
I haven't read those in ages.
Yeah, no, I mean they've been around for a while. Oh, and the other one, Garth Nix, Sabriel. I've just reread Lyriel recently, and I was thinking I really like your magic system with the writing, the sort of inscriptions underlying everything. It's great. If you haven't read those, highly recommended. The books.
I can't see a bell without thinking of Garth Nix.
Oh yeah, the reference there, listeners, is that the Ab Horton, who's like the necromancer figure, a good but good, has bells that take you through the gates towards death. And it's just brilliant. It's wonderful, wonderful book.
Yeah, those are
series.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So we usually finish, Alwyn, with having a bit of fun about just thinking about all the fantasy worlds we've enjoyed in books and on screen or wherever. And we think of one theme from your book and work out if we were going to take that idea elsewhere, where would we have the best experience? And your book has lots of those parties, the bright young thing parties of, sipping champagne and dancing the night away. Where do you think in all the fantasy worlds is the best place to go for that kind of high class party? We're not talking like a Hobbit knees up. We're talking, champagne and caviar and dancing.
It's so funny because the first one that came to my mind was The Rose Bargain by Sacha Payton Smith, which is a book that came out about this time last year, which is set in sort of an alternate Regency version of England, where essentially for the last few hundred years, instead of by the kings and queens, things have been ruled over by a fairy queen who sort of appeared on a Tudor battlefield and took over, just because sort of the magic and all of these beautiful things immediately came to mind. And then I thought of the quite sinister side of that world and the fairies. So I thought maybe not that. And the next one that came to my head is I recently read this may be recency bias, but I recently read The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson, which is a phenomenal book. She's a former crime writer who has written a murder mystery fantasy. And one of the things in her world is that there are different animals that you can be associated to that you can sort of pledge your allegiance to, essentially, and it determines the course of your life. So, for instance, people who pledge the fox might be thieves or assassins, what have you. And the thing that I really loved about it that I felt is often missing in fantasy books is that if you pledge yourself to the monkey, that makes you an artist. So there are incredible singers and painters and dancers and all of these things that I sometimes find that we miss out in fantasy books just because we're so preoccupied by the plot and the killing and the sort of, even I think there was a scene in the Notorious Virtues where they went to sort of an art gallery opening that just had to get cut for pacing and time. As you say, it's quite a long book, but they throw a great party, the monkeys, in the sort of people who are pledged to the monkey temple in the book, because they sort of put up beautiful, canopies and gorgeous, and you can watch a performance while you sip your wine and sit there and enjoy yourself. And I think that is what comes to my mind, because I think it's sort of the creativity and the beauty of that would make for sort of a very beautiful party. So that's what came to my head.
Oh, that's a good pick. I feel as though I need to go slightly different from you now. So I was also thinking Regency, a sort of
a good era.
I always get the name wrong. It's Mr. Strange and Dr. Norrell, or Dr. Norrell, or Jonathan Strange and
Mr. Norrell. Yeah.
Yeah. That because that's the Regency bias, as you say. But I think probably I would go for sort of a sci-fi version of it, and I think you could have a hilariously elegant party, but a bit spoof, in the world of Douglas Adams and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. On one of the planets, there's probably in that universe a party planet.
There probably is.
And St. Ford Beeblebrox would turn up. Yeah, so I think I'll choose that just to go a little bit different. I think you've given me some great book recommendations whilst we've been going on, so I'm going to have to go. That's my favorite thing. Raven Scholar and the Blood Over the Haven.
Blood Over Bright Haven. Yeah. They're very different books. One's harrowing, one's less so.
Oh, okay. But I would say we've both read your book, but I want to really highly recommend it to our listenership. If you like your parties in the 1920s with Grimm's fairy tale trial, it's a brilliant read. And you were telling me that it's going to be 2 parts, and you have written the second part.
That's right. Yeah, the second
part. Has it got a title?
Yeah, it's called The Glorious Vices. We were just talking about how difficult, before we got on here, we were talking about how difficult titling a book is. And it was so difficult titling The Notorious Virtues that we titled the second book at the same time. So we always knew it was going to be The Notorious Virtues and The Glorious Vices. And it is due out very early next year. So Feb of 27.
Yeah. So if you're like my daughter and won't start a series until you know that it's going to be complete, rest assured it's going to have the second part. So you can start on the first part this year and pick up the second part next year. Anyway, Alwyn, thank you so much for joining me, and all the best with The Glorious Vices.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Mythmakers podcast, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. Visit oxfordcenterforfantasy.org to join in the fun. Find out about our online courses, in-person stays in Oxford, plus visit our shop for great gifts. Tell a friend and subscribe wherever you find your favourite podcasts worldwide.
If the world were like a Sleep Number mattress, everything would adapt for your comfort. Because as your life changes and your body changes, Sleep Number mattresses adapt and shift to give you personalized comfort night after night. And now it's the final days of our Everything's on Sale event. Save up to $1,200 on mattresses. Our Memorial Day event ends Monday. To experience a whole new world of comfort, visit a Sleep Number store or go to sleepnumber.com. Sleep Number, to a good life sleep.